Hello, today we're going to be taking a look at this laptop. It is the, well, last generation, but still fairly new, 2025, Lenovo 9i laptop. It features a pretty great system. We're going to be going over why I decided to purchase this laptop now at the end of 2025 / the beginning of 2026 versus waiting for the next generation, and where I actually purchased from and its overall performance specs. So I hope you'll join me here on Computer Tech and More as we take a look at this laptop. First, where did I buy it? I bought this from, well, Best Buy, and I bought it as an open box in an excellent condition. So that allowed me to save a ton of money. Otherwise, it would have been a like $1,500 laptop. Instead, I bought it for about $1,000. Price variations do happen. Last time I checked, it was at $1,100, give or take. There was another laptop I was considering. It was the Asus ProArt 13. However, I personally have a fondness towards 14-inch laptops, and I love 2-in-1s. So the Asus would have gotten me the 2-in-1, a dedicated GPU. However, it was a smaller screen, and I don't trust Asus in terms of battery life. And since this is mainly a travel companion, that was a more important aspect of it. My previous laptop, which we're also going to talk about, matter of fact, it's just off camera over there, is the Lenovo C940, and I really like that laptop. So I decided to get this one to go. Now, as to why I purchased it now. Well, with the RAM prices and laptops expecting to rise in price by 20%, ouch, I decided that that was going to be too expensive. I was in the market to potentially buy a laptop in the next year or two, but a 20% hike in price, not performance, was not going to be in the books to be able to purchase a new laptop with that kind of expense. So I wanted something with 32 gigs of RAM. My old one had 16, which was sufficient. However, I'm doing more video editing and stuff like that for this channel, so I needed a little bit more. So I had to make the decision, do I want to save or do I want to upgrade now? And I ended up choosing to upgrade now. And while the Pro would have gotten me more performance, I felt this was sufficient, going to give me great battery life and be overall kind of the package that I ended up wanting. But yeah, basically why I ended up purchasing it now was just basically because of the whole, like, the industry in upheaval and the prediction of higher prices. And why I didn't just buy one new instead of doing open box? Well, that came to need to save money because expecting things to be expensive with the current state of the economy. Anyways, let's go on to happier news and go over how this laptop is, because I've decided to keep it and I've so far really liked it and it's doing everything I want it to do. All right, let's go over a little bit of the tech specs of this laptop. It has an Intel Ultra 7 258V processor. It has 4 big cores and 4 small cores, overall making a good mix and match of performance in theory. Let's see, it's got 32 gigs of RAM, LPDDR5, X, 38, 50, 33 megahertz dual channel, 1 terabyte SSD at Gen 4 speeds, a 75 watt-hour battery, 4 speakers, 2 tweeters, and 2 supposed woofers, cameras. It has cameras, 5 megapixel, and an IR camera with a privacy shutter. Ports on the laptop include 2 USB-C Thunderbolt 4 ports at 40 gigabytes per second with DisplayPort and power delivery, a USB-A at 10 gigabit speeds. On the right side, you have USB-C at 20 gigabit speeds, full functionality, including USB 4 functionality, mined at that 20 gigabit per second speed, audio jack and power button, Wi-Fi 7, 2x2, Bluetooth 4, and the display is a glorious 2.8K, as they're calling it, 2880 by 180 screen with a 30 to 120 hertz range. Overall, it's a very good looking display with some HDR aspects up to 1100 nits brightness. I cannot test that to verify it. However, when I was using the laptop, it certainly did pop and look quite good. With 100% sRGB, 100% P3, and a 99% Adobe RGB suites with Dolby Vision and VESA certification in HDR True Black 1000. It does have an optional 14-inch 4K display, but I did not take a look at that, so I'm going to move on past where that is. Laptop comes in weighing around 2.9 pounds or 1.32 kilograms, depending on where you are. It has a yoga pen, And it comes in cosmic blue. And so let's take a look at the laptop. I want to talk briefly about using the Yoga 9i. The trackpad on it feels excellent. It blends right into the surface of the machine, but it's highlighted so you can easily see it. It's nice and large, filling the space, well, very nicely, as I just said. The keyboard is excellent to type on. Very similar to the original one for the Yoga C940 that I had. Fingerprint reader over here in the corner, and all the other buttons are nicely laid out. Now, you do have like your boost speed, volume, and not sure what this one does. Oh, turned on the camera, I guess. Oh, yes. So over there, so the keyboard is shifted one key space that way. So it is still nicely centered, and it causes really no issues for using the keyboard as compared to the original. So as a comparative standpoint, here is my original C940. You can see that the keyboard is very similarly laid out. It's just they shifted over, got rid of this bezel basically on the sides to fill the space. In terms of size of the device, you can see if I line up this first edge, so get it right there, so it's nicely lined up, that they're near on the exact same size. Just a little bit of extra vertical height on the new one, since it does have extra screen real estate vertically, as well as the face recognition camera. Now, you can choose whether or not you want it, so it does have a little shutter, so you can manually shut it. But of course, then the face recognition software won't work to log you in automatically. You'll need to use the fingerprint reader right there, which appears to be an upgrade over the original one, which was this socket right here on the C940. So visual appearance-wise, you know, very similar, just blue, gray, yada, yada, yada. They're approximately the same height. The new one appears to be slightly taller. The new screen is excellent and bright. I'm going to put up a video of the same thing on both screens so you can see what it looks like. All right, I picked an HDR video. Now, this one is not HDR. This one is HDR, meaning in terms of the screen. But my room environment is pretty realistic for how you'd use a laptop, and I would just want to demonstrate how the screens overall look. So, you know, you can see my reflection in it. And it's, you know, both are good. But as things go to black, so now that I've turned off the room lights, you can really see how the darker blacks look on the new laptop, and just how you get, starting the videos over again just for demonstration purposes, you can see how the colors, so I have them both at 1080p, are a bit more washed out. Mine, it still looks good. The IPS display on the original laptop looks good, but you get a ton more detail by going with an IPS or a OLED display. It does have the potential to draw significantly more battery, especially when it's doing HDR highlights. But also, if you're using it in dark mode or something like that, you can save a lot more battery life than you can on a traditional LCD display. At least that's what I believe I've read. So either way, the screen quality over here on the new laptop for OLEDs looks excellent. As for risk of burn-in, that's just something you're gonna have to weigh yourself. The OLED display was not a buying factor for me. However, the resolution was at just shy of a 4K display. Personally, I think it's, yeah, 4K draws a lot more battery life. 1080p, which is what is on the original C940, is kind of a sweet spot for me, where you get a great resolution without drawing too much battery life. And the new display is a little bit higher resolution, but still should have excellent battery life. Just as a note for that video clip, I just realized that I was actually in minimum brightness and on battery, which turns off HDR. However, you still get the excellent backlighting, black and detailed lighting that you get in a regular OLED display. When it's plugged in, I have HDR set to be able to just turn on automatically, and this is a battery saving feature of this laptop. Now on here, I would recommend that, being an OLED, you want to set the display brightness to as low as you can while still not straining your eyes, your HDR profile. So I do have this set at turning on only when I am plugged in. Again, battery saving feature. I'm not going to turn off the taskbar at the bottom. It is just a sacrifice I'm going to make with this laptop, but I'm going to try to keep everything on dark modes to try to preserve it as much as possible. There are no real other distinct differences, like it still has the little sound bar right here. And if we flip the laptop over to take a look at the bottoms, we can see that the new one has a much larger ventilation patch to allow more fresh air inside of it, because, well, components, despite being more power efficient, still draw a ton of power and it needs additional cooling. We're going to take a look inside here in a minute. Gaming-wise, the new i9 with the 258V appears to do fairly well overall. Now, I haven't actually gamed specifically on it. However, don't expect groundbreaking performance. We're gonna have some charts here in a second that show its performance in 3D Mark compared to other machines I've owned, but effectively it's like having around the same performance as like a GTX 760, which means you can still game on a ton of different games, but don't expect it to be like, I don't know, 4K gaming. You're gonna be gaming at, 1080p, and that is pretty good.
So these are the different machines that are going to be directly compared in the following graphs and charts. So starting on the left side, we have my oldest laptop, which I actually no longer own, but I still have all the data for it. It is the Asus UX303. It came with an i7-4510U CPU, and the GPU had an NVIDIA 840M. It was DirectX capable, however, or 1012 capable, however, it was low powered. I put it at the same level of performance as an 8800 GTX from, when was that, 2006-ish. Then the next laptop, or I should say CPU processor computer that I'm going to take a look at is my NUC, and is the NUC8i5BEH. So obviously it is an 8th gen CPU, i5-8259U, 28 watt CPU, and the GPU in it is the Iris 655 that approached the same performance level of an 8800 GTX in theory. Then we had my laptop, previous laptop from Lenovo, the C940. It has an i7 1065 G7 with the GPU being the Iris G7, also known as like the 650, and this had a very similar performance level to the previous mentioned, hardware, the NUC basically. Then we have my Asus Zephyrus G15 laptop with a Ryzen 9 5900HS. This laptop has since gone to my wife. Very powerful 8-core CPU with an RTX 3070 GPU and a Vega 8 mobile GPU, which I do have some data marks for. Then we have the newest laptop that's this particular review and kind of what's going on with the market right now, where it's the Yoga 9i Ultra 7 258V, and the GPU in it is the Arc 1040V. Now we're going on to sort of my desktop replacements with the Minis Forum BD790i with a Ryzen 7945HX beefy 16-core CPU, but the GPU in it, I'm just using the built-in processor, and it's a measly 610M. And then we're on to my older and more recent desktop class hardware. The CPUs don't matter as much on here, so the main CPUs that are going to be focused on that are going to be in some of the graphs are the i7-6700K, the 11700K, the Ryzen 5 7600X, and the Ryzen 7 9700X. And the GPUs that are going to be on the graphs here are going to be the GTX 760, the GTX 1070, and the more powerful RTX 3070 and 4080 are not going to be on here because they are way more powerful than the GPU in this laptop. And the older GPUs are more in line where its performance may or may not lie. So let's go ahead and move on to the graphs. First one here is Time Spy, and this is for the CPU. If you're wondering on the graphs, if it's denoted with a C, it means a CPU. If it's denoted with a G, it's for GPU. And if it's combined test, it'll say combined. All right. So the new laptop with the Ultra 258V for the CPU is actually really quite powerful. It's almost in line with the 5900HS in terms of what this benchmark shows in performance, completely blowing away the old 1070 or 1065 G7, the i7-8259U, and basically everything else, and that is not a desktop class processor. That is truly modern. So it completely blows away like the 6700K, which makes sense, that was a 4-core CPU, but it does fall behind a 6-core 7600X desktop class processor. Moving on to graphics performance. So these aren't in order of performance, they're in order of kind of which machine is it. So the Arc 1040V, these names are not easy, especially some of the newer ones, so I do apologize for the pauses, is right here at the top of the graph marked in yellow. The Vega with the 5900HS is one of the bottom performers. The RTX 3070 obviously blows it away, being a dedicated GPU, but the ARC 1040V does blow away old integrated solutions from Intel, like the Iris G7, which again was at about the same performance level as an 8800 GTX from 2006, which was kind of a target point for that laptop, meaning for my old C940, I wanted it to have the same performance level as an 8800 GTX. That was my first real gaming GPU, and it could play DirectX 9 and DirectX 10 games, but obviously we've moved a lot beyond that, so having that extra overhead and performance is, well, significant. And in this test, the ARC 1040 is above the performance of a GTX, why did I type in GTR? GTX 760. So that is a great leap in performance, but you're not quite getting the same performance as a GTX 1070. But nonetheless, that gives a lot of, well, high detailed games at 1080p, potentially. Depends on how much memory your system has, and that GPU can utilize. Night Raid for CPU. This CPU does really quite well. It is one of the top performers, beating out the 5900HS. And I didn't test all of them, but it beats out the i7-6700K, and it's just a little bit behind the 7945HX. Actually, it's more than a little bit, but it's remarkably close compared to other CPUs that were tested on this. And as for GPU performance, it is just about tied with the RTX 3070, which is a truly impressive result, but do keep in mind that benchmarks do not indicate actual gaming performance. It is a test-by-test basis. So in whatever this benchmark actually utilizes is where it's similar in performance to the RTX 3070. In Port Royale, I didn't test that many. In graphics performance, it is quite a bit behind the RTX 3070. So in Port Royale, the mobile RTX 3070 does blow away the ARC 140V. In Steel Nomad light graphics performance, the ARC 10140V is a bit more performant than the Iris G7. And you will notice that it's listed 2 times, and that's because in one dataset I did mark it at the RTX 3070, which it is not. Then we are on to Firestrike for the CPU performance. The Ultra 258V is a very high-end performer, falling a little bit below the older 5900HS mobile CPU. And if we compare to desktop class processors, it is a little bit behind the 7600X. But it blows away older CPUs like the 6700K and falls significantly behind, well, really high thread count 7945HX, but it blows away a lot of the older Intel options that were 4-core and dual-core options. Obviously, dual cores are going to be way less performance. In terms of graphics performance, the ARC 140V is really actually doing really quite well. It outperforms the RTX 760, but does fall behind the GTX. Did I say RTX 760? GTX 760, and falls significantly behind the GTX 1070. But the CPU should be strong enough to play older games at 1080p and newer games at probably with the upscaling technologies, whichever one you use, DLSS and whatnot, to play at kind of rendering at the low resolution and upping it to 1080p, or you may need to drop the resolution. But yeah, I would say that performance is pretty darn good, especially considering it's a mobile CPU or GPU and integrated. That's what I was trying to think of. All right, Firestrike combined, and this is where it really separates out the true performance of a mobile solution, because it hits both components the hardest simultaneously, and so it really maxes out the cooling solution. So the ARC 140V is still holding up really quite nicely, outperforming the GTX 760, but still falling behind like the GTX 1070. Makes a lot of sense. We talked about it before. And it completely blows away the other integrated solutions other than the dedicated mobile RTX 3070. Now we're into 3D Mark 11 for the CPU, and here it is in kind of that second place position, falling quite a bit behind the 11700K and outperforming the 6700K and outperforms the 5900HS. In terms of the graphics performance, it does outperform the GTX 760, falls behind the GTX 1070, but it outperforms all the other integrated solutions other than the RTX 3070 mobile. And in that all-important combined test, in my opinion, it is near on the same performance as the GTX 1070, which isn't actually true. This has to do with how the combined tests are actually equalized and functionalized. So just because on here it looks like that it's nearly the same, it's kind of because the ARC 140V has a better processor than what's attached to the GTX 1070. If I attached a more modern, let's say a 6 or 8 core, there'd be a huge difference. So in this particular test, I'd be maxing out the CPU and it would be pulling back on the GPU, not allowing it to hit 100%. But comparing it to the GTX 1070, not 1070, 760, the performance differences, I would say, are very accurate. So now we're into the CPU profile test. So for maximum threads, or maximum capability, it is more performant than the 5900HS, but it falls behind the 7600X, 7900X, and of course the 11700K. But it does outperform a lot of the other mobile solutions here. For 16 threads, it outperforms the 5900HS once again, but you can see where it performs compared to the other ones. At 8 threads, it outperforms the 5900HS by quite a large margin. A little bit behind the 7940HS, HX, and it's about the same performance level as a 7600X. For 4 threads, it is one of the top performers here. It is just a little bit behind the 7945HX, right in line with the 7600X, though it does fall behind the 9700X, and it's a little bit above the 11700K. And for 2 threads, it is one of the top performers. I'm not going to read all the numbers, but it is right towards the top with only a few, beating it out by not a lot. And in 1 thread, it is basically in second place, but not by a huge margin, and it will depend on, well, your cooling environment, whether you have it on a pad or it's lifted or anything like that. And as a note, that this CPU, I should have said this at the beginning, was in its default profile. I did not put it in high performance mode, so there is actually more performance to be had with all these benchmarks, but for a good balance with battery life and performance, I would say balance mode is probably where you want a laptop to sit, unless you're going to be using it as a desktop replacement most of the time.
Getting into the bottom is a little bit more complicated than the previous version, so you have to remove the rubber foot at the back to then get at some Phillips head screws in the back, right there. Otherwise, everything else is Torx, much like the original. And there it is, the previous C940 versus the new 9i in terms of internal components. So it's pretty obvious that the upgrade is in the fan size to allow for better cooling. The heat, or the heat pipes, appear to be a very similar design. And the one piece of disappointment for me is the shrink in the SSD. Rather than being full size, like over here, it's now 2242 in terms of length, which is a very awkward size, so it makes it much more difficult to upgrade. But one of the things I'm going to be taking a look at here while we're inside it is, can I just stick a full-size one in there and have it fit and close up the laptop? Not saying that I would recommend doing that, but I want to see if it'll fit. So this is a single-sided SSD. It's an older one, which is why I don't mind doing this experiment. But if you can see on there, it creates a bit too much of a gap, and so the laptop would likely run into interference with it. So thus, a longer drive would not fit in there. So you're stuck with either getting another 2242 or going and shrinking down to the next size down, which is what, a 2230?
So, as a general conclusion, what do I think about this laptop? It's not perfect, and it isn't exactly what I was hoping for, but with the current environment and the uncertainty in the market, based on pricing that I've seen for next generation models, they're looking at speccing out something, the next generation of this, at $1,800+, and that's not final pricing. I don't know the memory, and I don't know the CPU, but that looked like the starting price. So the fact that I bought this for $1,000, I can't justify that extra $800, even with a performance increase. So is this laptop perfect? No, but is it hitting that good enough mark for the performance that we saw compared to other machines? For longevity, 32 gigs of RAM. I upgraded the SSD to a 2 terabyte model, and this should last me another 6 years. So am I happy with it? I mean, yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't keep it. But is it truly what I was looking for? hoping to get? No, unfortunately, it's kind of a bittersweet moment with regard to buying a machine in this current environment where we have to buy things based on, well, availability and our own personal finance. So, yeah, kind of a downer with the way I'm ending it. But if you are in the market for a laptop that's a 2-in-1 with good performance, buy it before it sells out completely from Best Buy. Deals are still had. As far as I looked a couple weeks ago at the beginning of January. So good luck, and thank you for joining me on this journey for taking a look at the 2025 Lenovo 9i.